The antique clock above the counter at the Night Owl Diner pushed past midnight, each tick a soft metallic whisper swallowed by the insistent hiss of burgers on the griddle. Outside, a relentless Baltimore rain hammered against the plate glass windows, blurring the neon sign into a hazy crimson smear across the wet linoleum. The air inside was thick with the smells of fried onions, old coffee, and damp wool. A familiar comfort on a night that felt anything but. Behind the long Formica counter, a young woman named Maya Rodriguez moved with a practiced economy of motion, her hands, though delicate, betraying a faint tremor as she refilled a thick ceramic mug for a man at the end of the bar. Her dark eyes, framed by a fringe of exhaustion, held a deeper, more persistent shadow, a cold, hard knot of fear that had taken up permanent residence in the pit of her stomach. With every jingle of the bell over the door, every scrape of a chair, her head would snap up, her gaze darting toward the rain-streaked window. She was watching for the watcher. Just beyond the glow of the diner, shrouded by the storm and the flickering streetlights of Charles Street, a figure stood motionless, his silhouette a constant, terrifying presence. If you hold on to the belief that compassion can be found in the most unexpected corners of the world, that a person's worth is not defined by their past, and that true strength often wears a formidable disguise, then this story is a testament to that faith. It's a story that might just mend a small piece of a broken world, proving that sometimes guardian angels don't have wings. They have engines. Maya had been pouring coffee and serving up late-night comfort at the Night Owl for almost 2 years, an eternity in diner time. Life had dealt her a hand she was still learning how to play. She'd arrived in Baltimore from a small town in Pennsylvania, a place so insular that secrets were community property, and her own troubled history clung to her like a second skin. Her father's departure when she was 15 had been the first domino to fall, followed by her mother's slow surrender to a quiet, simmering despair. By the time she was 19, Maya had mastered the solitary art of survival, learning to rely on no one but herself. The meager paycheck from the diner was a constant battle against the rent for her tiny, drafty apartment in Hampton, but it offered a fragile sense of autonomy. It had been her sanctuary, a place of predictable rhythms and anonymous faces, until he had shattered that peace. His name was Kevin Peterson, a mechanic from a garage a few blocks over. He had a smile that never quite reached his eyes, and an air of entitlement that set Maya's teeth on edge from the moment he'd first tried to ask her out. She'd turned him down gently, a polite refusal buffered by a practiced customer service smile. But Kevin didn't operate on a frequency that recognized polite refusal. His interest curdled into obsession. It began with him waiting for her shift to end, a casual presence that quickly felt predatory. He'd follow her to the bus stop, his conversation a one-sided stream of questions she didn't want to answer. Then came the unwanted gifts, a wilted bouquet of carnations left on her doorstep, a cheap teddy bear tucked under her windshield wiper. When she continued to ignore him, the gestures soured. Anonymous notes appeared, slipped under her apartment door, their messages veering from desperate pleas to veiled threats. She started hearing phantom footsteps in the hallway outside her door late at night, the creak of a floorboard that wasn't the wind. Friends urged her to go to the police, and she had once. She sat in a sterile, brightly lit precinct, trying to explain a fear that was made of shadows and feelings. The officer had listened with a weary patience, explaining that without a direct threat, without a physical act, there was little they could do. Try to avoid him, he'd advised, as if it were that simple. So tonight, as the Chesapeake storm threw its full fury at the city, that familiar icy dread trickled down Maya's spine. Kevin was out there, a sentinel of his own twisted devotion, standing across the street under the sputtering orange glow of a street lamp. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead, but he didn't seem to notice, his focus locked on the diner, on her. Maya tried to breathe, to focus on the simple, grounding tasks of her job, wiping the counter, stacking plates, checking the coffee pots. But the panic was a rising tide in her chest, hot and suffocating. Her eyes scanned the handful of late-night patrons, a mix of truckers and weary third-shifters, their faces illuminated by the jukebox's soft glow. And then her gaze landed on him. He was sitting alone in the last booth, a man who seemed to absorb the light around him. He was immense, with shoulders that strained the seams of a worn black leather vest, his arms covered in a tapestry of intricate tattoos. He was a black man, his features carved with a quiet intensity, his head shaved clean, a neatly trimmed beard framing a firm jaw. The patches on his vest told a story of brotherhood and rebellion, but the one on his back, bold and unmistakable, said it all. Hell's Angels. His name was Marcus Jones, though the patch above his heart read Preacher. His reputation, like the rumble of his motorcycle, often preceded him. A low thunder that warned of an approaching storm. To the world, he was the embodiment of danger, an outlaw living by a code most couldn't comprehend. But in that moment, as Maya's world felt like it was shrinking to the size of her own fear, he looked like the only safe harbor in the entire city. Summoning a courage she didn't feel, she picked up a fresh pot of coffee and walked toward his booth. The scent of rain, leather, and engine oil clung to him. As she poured the dark liquid into his mug, her hand shook so violently that a few drops splashed onto the saucer. Her voice, when it came, was a reedy whisper, barely audible above the diner's ambient noise. "He won't stop following me." The words were fragile, almost lost, but they found their mark. Marcus looked up from his mug, his eyes dark and piercing, meeting hers. There was no surprise in them, only a deep, unnerving calm. He didn't speak. He simply, slowly, turned his head and looked out the window, his gaze cutting through the rain-streaked glass to find the figure of Kevin Peterson standing across the street. A subtle shift occurred in his expression, not a flash of anger, but the settling of a quiet, unshakable resolve. He took a slow sip of his coffee, placed the mug down on the table with a soft click, and his voice, when he finally spoke, was a low, steady rumble. "Go in the kitchen. Don't come out until I tell you." Maya nodded, a silent wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled her knees. She retreated through the swinging doors, her heart hammering against her ribs, and peered through the small, diamond-shaped window. A few minutes stretched into an eternity. Then the bell above the diner door chimed, a sharp, jarring sound that cut through the storm's drone. Kevin Peterson stepped inside, dripping water onto the floor, a smug, possessive smirk twisting his lips as his eyes searched for Maya. But his search was cut short. Marcus was already on his feet, standing between the counter and the door, a silent, immovable mountain of leather and muscle. His sheer presence seemed to alter the gravity in the room, drawing all the air toward him. Kevin, momentarily flustered, tried to sidestep him, muttering something about needing to talk to Maya. Marcus didn't move an inch. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't clench his fists. He simply stood there, a bulwark of absolute certainty. When he spoke, his voice was deceptively calm, yet it carried the weight of a final judgment. "Not tonight," he said, the words hanging in the air like cold steel. "Not ever again." What followed was not a brawl. There was no shouting, no thrown punches, none of the cheap violence one might expect. It was a confrontation of a different nature, a silent, suffocating pressure that seemed to drain the warmth from the room. Kevin, accustomed to being the predator, looked into Marcus's unblinking eyes and saw something he had never encountered before, a complete and total absence of fear. He saw a man who didn't need to make threats because his very existence was a promise. The smirk on Kevin's face dissolved, replaced by a flicker of genuine terror. He saw the patch on the vest, the hardened look in the man's eyes, and understood that he had crossed a line into a world whose rules he did not understand and could not hope to survive. The weight of that stare, steady and profound, was enough to shatter his predatory confidence. After a long, charged moment that felt like an hour, Kevin's bravado crumbled completely. He took a stumbling step back, turned without another word, and fled, slamming the diner door behind him so hard the glass rattled in its frame. The storm outside seemed to swallow him whole. From the kitchen doorway, Maya watched him go, the tears she hadn't realized she was holding back now streaming freely down her cheeks, hot tracks of relief on her cold skin. When she finally stepped back into the main dining area, Marcus was already sitting in his booth again, his coffee now cold. She opened her mouth to thank him, to ask him why, to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't form. He simply looked at her and gave a short, definitive nod. "You're safe now," he said, the statement not a reassurance, but a fact. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small wad of bills, and laid them on the table, far more than enough to cover his coffee and a generous tip. Then he rose, walked out of the diner, and disappeared into the rain-swept night. A moment later, the deep, throaty roar of a Harley-Davidson engine split the air, then faded into the distance, leaving only the sound of the rain and the ticking clock. The encounter didn't end with the fading sound of his motorcycle. The next morning, when Maya arrived for her shift, she found a small folded piece of paper had been slipped under the diner's front door. Her stomach lurched, her mind immediately assuming it was from Kevin. But the handwriting was rough and blocky, completely unfamiliar. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. The message was short, devoid of pleasantries, yet it carried a profound weight. "If he ever comes near you again," it read, "tell them the angels are watching." A strange mixture of emotions washed over her, awe, disbelief, and a gratitude so immense it felt like a physical presence in her chest. Over the next few days, a quiet miracle unfolded. Kevin Peterson vanished from her life as completely as if he had never existed. He wasn't waiting at the bus stop. No more flowers appeared on her car. The phantom footsteps in her hallway ceased. A week later, she heard from one of the other waitresses that Kevin had abruptly quit his job at the garage. Rumor had it he'd sold his car for cash and left town in a hurry, leaving behind an unpaid month of rent and a garage full of tools. No one knew where he went, and no one seemed to care. The oppressive cloud of fear that had hovered over Maya for months began to dissipate, slowly at first, then all at once, like a morning fog burning off in the sun. Life began to find its rhythm again, but it was a new rhythm, one underscored by a newfound sense of security. The smiles she gave her customers were no longer strained. The sound of her own laughter, once a foreign concept, started to feel natural again. She worked her shifts at the Night Owl, carefully saving every dollar she could, and with the shadow of Kevin gone, she finally felt brave enough to pursue a dream she'd long deferred. She enrolled in evening classes at the Community College of Baltimore County, determined to build a future that was hers and hers alone. Still sometimes, late at night, when the city grew quiet, she would hear the distant rumble of motorcycles echoing through the streets. Instead of flinching, she would walk to her window and look out, a part of her half expecting to see a lone, dark figure parked under a streetlight, a silent guardian keeping watch. The sight never came, but the feeling of being protected lingered, a warm and steady ember. Months melted away. The suffocating humidity of summer gave way to the crisp, cool air of autumn. One bright Saturday morning, the sound of dozens of motorcycles descended on her neighborhood. Maya was wiping down the counter when she saw them pull into the diner's parking lot, a formidable convoy of chrome and black leather. Her heart gave a familiar jolt, but this time it wasn't fear. It was recognition. A banner strapped between two of the bikes announced their purpose: a charity ride for the Johns Hopkins Children's Center. They were here not to cause trouble, but to raise money for sick kids. And there, in the middle of the group, was Marcus. He dismounted his bike with the same deliberate grace she remembered, his presence as commanding as ever. He looked different in the bright morning sun, less a creature of the night and more a pillar of quiet strength. As he removed his helmet, his eyes scanned the diner and found hers through the window. A slow smile spread across Maya's face, the first one she had ever directed at him that was born not of terror, but of pure, unadulterated gratitude. He held her gaze for a long moment, and then he gave her a slow, deliberate nod in return. No words were necessary. In that silent exchange, an entire conversation took place, an acknowledgement of a debt that could never be repaid with money, only with a shared understanding of a kindness offered in a moment of darkness. Sometimes, the world's most feared outlaws are the ones who step up to protect the vulnerable when no one else is looking. That night, after she had locked up the diner and the last of the bikers had ridden off, Maya stood on the empty sidewalk, looking up at the vast, star-dusted canopy above the city. She whispered a quiet thank you into the darkness, a prayer of gratitude for the unlikely angels who rode the highways. She knew that somewhere out on the open road, A group of men judged harshly by the world were thundering through the night, their engines a roaring hymn, not as menaces, but as the unsung guardians of the forgotten and the afraid.